The Prince of Wales and Camilla Parker Bowles were seen together in public for the first time, walking down the steps of the Ritz after attending the 50th birthday celebration of Camilla's sister. There is one basic but profoundly important rule within the monarchy. Only one can be sovereign at any one time. Only one head wears a crown. Everyone else is under it. It seems an almost prosaic concept, but one weighted with importance. Even minor adjustments in royal duties usually become major stories because they reflect deeper questions of representation, trust, and influence. When the royal household rearranges responsibilities, it is not merely about scheduling or photo opportunities. It concerns who embodies the institution and which members of the family the public comes to rely upon. A recent and discreet reorganization within the royal household led to an announcement that caused quite a stir behind palace walls, reportedly leaving Queen Camilla unhappy. This was not a single decision, but a series of deliberate moves that, taken together, felt both surprising and necessary. At the center of the transition was an extensive review of royal patronages and presidencies. After the start of each new reign, it is customary for the household to consider which charities and institutions should remain under royal patronage, which should be passed on, and which should be released altogether. This time, however, the process was unusually large in scope. More than 1,000 connections between royals and organizations were considered, determining who would retain, gain, or lose affiliations. The review was couched as pragmatic, a way to square the family's commitments with a limited number of working royals, but it inevitably produced a list of winners and losers, roiling strong emotions throughout the royal circle. When the recommendations were made public, the reaction was swift. Hundreds of charities that had long enjoyed the prestige of royal support either were reassigned or dropped. For many, losing royal patronage meant more than symbolic disappointment. It was a threat to their visibility, funding, and even identity. Some organizations viewed the change positively, as an opportunity to redefine their mission or seek new patrons. Others took it as a disruption to dear traditions. The reshuffle reports emphasized that this wasn't just a bit of minor administrative housecleaning, but fundamental reconfiguration of who, within the royal family, would represent the monarchy in public life. The same review also reached the military and ceremonial appointments that have been long-standing sources of royal pride. Age and time eventually brought change. Senior royals began to step back, handing over regimental and honorary positions to younger members. One notable example was the Duke of Kent passing his long-held role as Colonel of the Scots Guards to another working royal. While practical, these transitions carry emotional weight. Regiments and organizations often feel a deep bond with the royals who have represented them for decades. Each handover marks the end of an era and the beginning of another, quietly reshaping the monarchy's structure and signaling a shift toward a smaller, more active group of royals. Meanwhile, the extensive renovation of Buckingham Palace, arguably the most ambitious in modern memory, became another focus of attention. The costly project, funded largely through the sovereign grant, required relocating major state events and drew intense scrutiny. While critics assailed the timing and expense amid a difficult economy, the palace maintained the work was essential to prevent far greater costs in the future. Still, the spending debate underlined how financial decisions influence public perceptions of what priorities the royals have and directly impact how much goodwill the family retains during turbulent times. All these developments, the patronage review, the reassignment of military roles, and the costly renovation together reshaped the balance of royal duties. Much of the added responsibility fell upon Queen Camilla. Having already established her own charitable profile as Duchess of Cornwall, she now found her workload expanding as the family consolidated public engagements. With fewer working royals to share the burden, her schedule grew denser, especially as the king's health required more careful management. This increased visibility came with mounting pressure and public scrutiny. Missed events, shorter appearances, and signs of fatigue became fodder for speculation, fueling narratives about the monarchy's vitality and long-term future. But being a working royal requires not only grace but stamina. The redistribution of duties forced a reassessment of who could shoulder which roles in the years to come, with real human consequences. Camilla's heavier workload took visible tolls and raised questions about her well-being. Reports of minor ailments, absences, and exhaustion were magnified in the media, often unfavorably compared to the unshakable consistency of Queen Elizabeth II. The late Queen's record of 7 decades on throne set an almost unreachable standard, and every successor inevitably faces comparison. The result has been a confused welter of sympathy, criticism, and public debate on the cost, point, and survivability of monarchy itself. Such discussions were further fueled by the review's uneven outcomes. Some charities praised Camilla's continued patronage, while others were suddenly cut off and expressed disappointment. This imbalance raised questions as to whether the basis for such decisions came through public value, personal preference, or strategic visibility. These concerns fed into a broader national conversation about transparency, accountability, and how the monarchy adapts to modern expectations. Decisions that might appear administrative from the inside often carry political and emotional weight in the public eye. Of course, the logistical and financial strain is accompanied by a deeply personal dimension. She is not only queen, but also wife to a husband in treatment. Balancing those private and public roles tested her in ways that few knew. Long days, constant travel, and pressure to appear composed at all times have taken their toll, according to sources. Small slips, missed speeches, shorter visits, or moments of visible fatigue instantly become magnified, shaping perceptions of both her and the institution she represents. As the circle of working royals grows smaller, the Queen's growing responsibilities and relentless pace have become central to understanding her reported frustration and the challenges facing the modern monarchy. It is easy to forget that royals, despite their profile, are people who age and get tired just like everybody else. When the public expects a certain relentless level of performance born from the memory of a 70-year reign, the reality of limitations produces anxiety both inside the palace and among the public. For Camilla, the added scrutiny was not only about whether she could keep up the pace, but whether the public would accept a different model of service, one that looks less like ceaseless activity and more like carefully selected appearances chosen for impact and sustainability. That idea of selectivity sits uneasily with some critics who prefer to see the Queen in more visible and frequent roles. The timing of the patronage review and the palace's other changes amplified the sense that the household was trying to steer the institution through a delicate moment. On the one hand, the shakeup aimed to modernize and make the work of the royals more sustainable. On the other, it exposed tensions about who gets to represent the family and which organizations get priority. Those tensions were especially visible in public reactions to who gained and who lost patronage. The palace framed the decisions as sensible planning, but in the media and on social platforms, the moves were read as clues about power, preference, and the direction in which the monarchy was heading. For some members of the family, the review offered relief, fewer duties, a clearer focus, and the chance to hand important roles to colleagues who could give them more energy. For others, it felt like a diminution of tradition, a cut without enough ceremony. The Duke of Kent stepping back from the Scots Guards, for example, was both an acknowledgment of his long service and a signal that the guard of working royals was tightening. These changes are practical and inevitable. The emotional cost is that long-linked relationships with institutions and communities feel suddenly altered or ended. People do not disappear easily from those ties after attending regimental events, hospital wards, and fundraising dinners throughout the decades. Thus, the handover roles brings both practical clarity and the sense of an era ending. The timing of major spending on the refurbishment of the palace made the entire household feel fragile in the public mind. When the public hears about expensive works and rising sovereign grant figures, along with stories of missed visits and changing patronages, a money tradition managerial choice narrative forms. The palace can rightly defend its actions as essential maintenance and thoughtful modernization. Critics say the optics are bad at a time when the country has economic pressures. That tension is not new, but the fierce focus on the figures made the reshuffle feel less like internal housekeeping and more like a very public test of the monarchy's relevance and priorities. Beyond the headlines, the reshuffle has consequences for the charities themselves. Royal patronage brings visibility. It opens doors, allowing organizations to reach donors and volunteers. When that link is removed, charities must rethink how to keep momentum. Some will adapt by forging new partnerships and refocusing their messaging. Others will struggle to maintain the public attention that only a royal connection can sometimes afford. That is part of the reason the decisions are sensitive, and why the fallout is not just political theater, but a matter of real-world consequence. For Camilla, the personal cost of being the visible face of contentious reshuffle cannot be ignored. Reports of charitable shops closing or financial worries at patron organizations feed into a story in which royal support is judged by its short-term results rather than its long-term symbolic value. When a charity associated with the Queen has to scale back, critics seize on it as proof that royal backing does not always translate into saving an organization. That narrative is painful and can be unfair. No single person, royal or otherwise, can control complex financial realities, but perception often outpaces nuance in public debate. For Camilla, being tied to the institution's financial and structural choices makes each announcement heavier and each absence more visible. There is, too, a more profound discussion of generational transition. The review deliberately shifted responsibilities toward younger working royals. That shift reflects the practical imperative to have those with energy and years ahead of them take on duties that require travel and sustained visibility. It also reflects a strategic desire to shape the monarchy's public face for the future. For older members like Camilla, the move to hand more international trips and high-profile engagements to the next generation can feel like a narrowing of scope. It can look in public framing like a temporary tenure rather than a lasting role. That perception may be unfair. The Queen's influence and patronage choices will resonate for years, but narrative tends to prefer tidy stories, and the idea of a temporary steward makes for a neat hook, even when reality is messier. Inside the household, the decisions were presented as careful planning. The aim was to make sure charities had consistent royal patrons and to make sure the family could sustain a credible public program without exhausting key members. But the human side of the story meant some individuals felt pushed and some felt overlooked. Camilla's reaction, described by insiders as frustration and fatigue, reflects the strain of carrying responsibility while being judged for circumstances that are only partly under her control. The challenges of public life, where every absence is weighed and every speech is parsed, create a pressure cooker environment in which routine administrative decisions are turned into personal trials. If this reshuffle has taught anything, it is that modernizing an ancient institution can never be about lists and roles. It's about psychology, habits, and history. It's about who the public trusts and why. To concentrate duties and shape a working group that could be sustained is sensible as a strategy, but bound to cause friction when long relationships are adjusted or ended. People with emotional claims to particular roles, veterans, charities, regional groups, often react to changes as losses of identity. That is a hard truth for institutions' managers to accept, particularly when they are dealing with centuries of tradition not easily untangled. To those invested in Camilla's success, the story gets read differently. They see a woman who has taken on more duties, managing the strain of public life, while standing by a partner during health treatment and trying to carry forward causes she believes in. Absences in a cautious public schedule are, to her supporters, not signs of failure, but a realistic approach to longevity and impact. They argue that the long-term value of a royal patron lies in sustained commitment rather than constant visibility, a steady champion who can use position and access to build relationships over time. That perspective sees a reshuffle not as a demotion, but as a recalibration that allows depth rather than breathless breadth. The critics and supporters each tell a part of the truth. A monarchy has to be visible enough to show relevance and connection, but sustainable enough that the people who represent it can keep giving without burning out.